Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to this session titled Bridging the Connectivity Gap for Excluded Communities. My name is Nena Paul Ugochukwu, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Paradigm Initiative, which is a non-profit dedicated to the promotion of digital inclusion and digital rights in Africa and the Global South. I'm honored today to guide today's conversation on a challenge that sits at the intersection of infrastructure, equity, and human rights, asking the question, how do we ensure meaningful, affordable, and inclusive connectivity for all? While internet access has significantly expanded globally, millions remain unconnected, particularly in rural, remote, and underserved regions. Bridging the last-mile connectivity gap is crucial for ensuring digital inclusion and achieving meaningful connectivity and access for all. Today's conversation will explore innovative solutions, policies, and business models aimed at addressing last-mile challenges, including community networks, public-private partnerships, emerging technologies like low Earth orbit satellites, 5G expansion, and alternative spectrum management approaches. So this session aims to generate actionable insights to inform global internet governance discussions, ensuring that unserved and underserved populations equitably benefit from the digital economy and essential online services. So today, to have this conversation and to bring it all together, I have with me, starting from the far left, Chris Locke, EVP and MD, Internet Society Foundation, who has spent decades building digital economies with GSMA Mobile for Development and Caribou Digital. I have on my immediate left, Tobekile Matimbe, Senior Manager, Partnerships and Engagements for Paradigm Initiative, and also an expert in human rights-based advocacy. I also have with me Onika Makwakwa, Executive Director, Global Digital Inclusion Partnership. She has worked for 25 years driving gender and equity-focused policy. And I also have with me Christian Leon Coronado, the Executive Director of Internet Bolivia. So today online, I also have my colleague, Sani Suleiman, who will be moderating and will be gathering questions and comments during plenary at the end of the panel discussion. So welcome once again, and I think we will dive right in and go for it, as my colleague always says. So I'll start the conversation today with Chris. So drawing from your leadership and your background in building digital economies, how can emerging technologies, like I mentioned, the low Earth orbit satellites and 5G be leveraged to bridge the connectivity gap in a sustainable way?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to the panel. It's lovely to be here. We are relatively agnostic at the Internet Society about what connectivity platforms people use to connect remote communities and the work we do with our community-led connectivity program. We have programs around the world that use a wide variety of platforms, whether it's fiber, whether it's LEOs, whether it's mobile. But what we have seen increasingly in the work that we do is how LEOs in particular can really help bridge remote communities for blindingly obvious reasons, in that, having satellites allows us to get connectivity to communities that otherwise would not be covered by fiber platforms or not be covered by mobile platforms. And we're seeing that increasingly, particularly in some island states. There's a very strong focus in the new 5-year strategy for the Internet Society on connecting small island states. And what we've seen particularly in the Pacific region is that satellite is increasingly becoming the norm for connectivity and is helping connect remote islands in exciting new ways. So indeed, in some cases, we're seeing communities and islands where Starlink is becoming the largest ISP in that island, and actually the majority of internet is coming over satellite platforms. So there are huge opportunities for the way that LEOs can work. And as more are launched and the prices come down, it becomes more affordable. Sustainability, though, we think is still an issue. And sustainability comes from two different areas. Firstly, obviously, is price. We're still in the very early stages of LEO Internet. And not only is the price initially expensive, but also we're increasingly seeing that as the networks become clogged, that prices sometimes are quite dynamic based on demand. So having coverage from a LEO constellation, having coverage from a LEO provider can absolutely provide connectivity to a remote area. But if the pricing is again unstable, and if, as we are seeing at the moment in some African cities with Starlink, where they're pretty much booked out in terms of connectivity and availability, then the sustainability issues around price are going to be significant. But also that level of service and that the contention ratios that you get from LEOs mean that delivering the demand that the market has is always going to be an issue as well. So there are opportunities with LEOs, and certainly when we work in some of our most remote areas, it is the most effective way of bringing internet to people. But the cost issues and the sustainability are going to be there. 5G shows promise, and a lot of fixed wireless 5G is really showing that it can be an alternative to fiber in many areas. But again, some of the cost issues are there. So certainly around spectrum, we are seeing some very interesting moves from regulators to try and make spectrum available to very local solutions for 5G. And if we can break out of that national 5G level licensing, and in the same way we have with Wi-Fi and community network licenses, look at having 5G licenses that can serve local communities at a very micro level, then we can reduce some of the costs of offering 5G spectrum to community networks and for community usage. But there's still the density issue. There is a real need for 5G masts to have a very strong physical density to achieve the highest throughput through the bandwidth. And that does mean that even though there are a lot of open source solutions out there now to be able to manage your own local 5G network, the density in terms of the infrastructure is still significant. So I think they're both very exciting ways for us to break out of what's been the norm in terms of how we're bringing internet to communities. They're both very exciting ways not only of bridging the divide to rural populations and remote populations, but also if we can get the licensing right, particularly around the spectrum, to make sure that communities can own the spectrum and use the spectrum in the way that makes sense for them, then there is a sustainability and an autonomy that will come from some of these solutions. But at the moment, we're really still in the early stages, and the pricing issues and the regulatory issues are still to be solved.
Thank you, Chris. And I love that you've touched on some of the lessons I think that you're already learning in implementing these solutions and talking about sustainability and the regulatory frameworks. So with ISOC Foundation, how do you evaluate, talking about sustainability, how do you evaluate the impact, and are there specific examples you can give with some of the lessons that you have shared that, can show how they can be replicated, across these local communities, because you specifically mentioned communities in Africa. Are there any specific examples? How are you evaluating? What are the lessons? And then how can those be replicated?
Yeah, the evaluation for us starts before the program begins. So we have a very good community readiness toolkit that we use when we're working on a potential project. And what we do with that toolkit is not only evaluate the technological solution, but as is implied in the title, we evaluate the community. We're trying to understand who is going to be leading this for the community. What is the governance structure and the support structure within the community for, is it a school? Is it a local organization? Who is going to be owning and maintaining the network? And then, how can we provide training to support them, not only just in the crimping of the wires, but also then in understanding what sustainability looks like. On a panel I was on yesterday when we were looking at kind of innovative financing in this space, we were talking about the need when we develop community networks to develop them with business training as well as with technology training. What we want to be able to do is provide our grant capital and our capacity building support to get local communities off the ground with their community-centered connectivity solutions. The next phase after that shouldn't be another grant. The next phase should be that there is real sustainability in that community network because they're able to build a pricing model that allows them to kind of cover the costs of the community. Often with schools, that's where schools can sell connectivity to the local community via voucher systems or whatever system works and support that out. But what we like to see in our community readiness toolkit is that the technology solution is there that's fit for that particular need, whatever the geographic need of that community is. But then from a business model perspective, that you're building a community network that is sustainable because it actually meets the needs of the community, can be managed by the community, and is economically sustainable as well.
Thank you, Chris. My takeaways from there is to be creative around how we around regulation, around licensing, and focusing also on building capacities of the community networks, ensuring that they are ready to manage these networks themselves and keep them sustainable. Thank you very much. So moving from connectivity and more to access and meaningful access, I'll come to you, Onika. So drawing from your leadership of the GDIP, what evidence-based policy and regulatory frameworks can best improve affordability and inclusion and support last-mile community initiatives such as the ones that Chris has given us examples of?
Great. Thank you so much for that question, and thanks for inviting us to this panel. It's always wonderful when we come to IGF and talk about these things, to also have a partner like Internet Society that's actually on the implementation side of making sure that some of these ideas have an opportunity to be tested out in communities. So in terms of, focusing on this last mile connectivity initiatives that are affordable and accessible to everyone, it's really important for us to continue to support policy frameworks that are people-centered at first, and that are designed through a lens of equity, human rights, and accountability. Because when we look at who is not connected at the moment, those tend to be the population that stands to benefit the most out of being connected when we talk about transformative qualities of connectivity. So the first thing that I would say is that we need to prioritize universal affordable access as a right. We need governments to embed digital access in development policies and frameworks and in the rights framework as well, treating connectivity as a public good and not just a nice to have, a luxurious thing. This includes setting very ambitious universal service goals and enshrining them in the right to meaningful connectivity that focuses on regular access, reliable access that is high quality, as well as affordable internet and devices for people to be able to benefit from digital technologies. The other item is we need to reform universal service and access funds. I think we've been talking about this for a really long time. It is quite evident, and we've done quite an audit a few years ago looking at universal service and access fund, how they're deployed, how effective they are, and it's quite clear that regulators should open, that countries should continue to utilize universal service access funds in a lot better way, perhaps even being open to addressing some of the demand side issues of connectivity, like digital skills and affordable devices. So it's not all just about infrastructure, but beginning to address the user, demand side aspects of that as well. We need transparency in how these funds are managed. We need to also have these funds take leadership in embracing gender-responsive strategies for how they're deploying, so that they put the least connected and the most disadvantaged at the center of their strategy and begin planning directly to impact those populations for the most part. And most importantly, we need public reporting, because we can't continue to have gatherings like this where we keep talking about how we don't really know, the impact of universal service and access funds, or that there are funds that are not utilized. And, enabling community networks and innovative models, regulators need to open up spectrum, and that's beginning to happen as we see with some of the work that Internet Society organizations have been doing around community networks and funding connectivity, community-based initiatives. And one of the things that's really key that Chris mentioned in, training for business and for technical skills, we need to be open to different financial models for connecting everyone. I think that, the pure commercial model alone is not going to be a size that fits all communities. So we need to be open to the fact that, in a continent like Africa, for example, where so many people live on less than $2 per day, we might even if a country reaches the affordability level, remember that's based on averages, we have to be willing to think about subsidies to certain communities or co-op model connectivity that allows those who may never be able to afford connectivity to be able to still have access as a public good and as a right for them to be connected. Mandating inclusive infrastructure sharing and open access is something we've talked about. I think at literally every IGF and gathering of this kind, and we need to see more and more efforts to prevent monopolies so that we're truly building connectivity strategies that focus on everyone being included. And lastly, integrating digital inclusion in broader economic and social policies. Connectivity policies need to be linked with the investments in digital literacy, local content devices, and online safety issues, because those issues also drive, the experience of people online. So I often say that we want everyone to go online to do what exactly? Read English, be on Facebook? I don't think so. I think there's a lot more. If we're talking about digital and transformation, we need to invest more in some of the other things that, ensure people are able to fully benefit meaningfully from being online, including relevant local content in local languages that people are able to consume. And lastly, I'll just summarize by saying that, policy and regulatory frameworks need to work for the last mile, and they need to focus on being, inclusive by design, accountable in delivery. Accountability is just one of those things that I'm pained by. I feel like we're just not seeing enough of that. And transformative in their impact. We are not just connecting people for access. It has to be beyond access. What is it that they're able to do to improve and change their lives by being connected? So we need to put that at the center so that it's all grounded in equity, actively dismantling structural barriers, and lastly, not leaving women behind. We've done a lot of work on connected resilience, which is a study that looks at gendered experiences of women. I invite you to read that report and just really see what the lived experiences of women is through meaningful connectivity, and you will really get a picture of how we've barely scraped the surface in terms of being inclusive in our connectivity efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Anika. I had a follow-up question that I believe you already started to answer, and that was around how we can move frameworks beyond just connectivity to ensure, like you said, meaningful access through digital literacy, cultural relevance, developing local content. Maybe touch a bit more on that, and also share what do you think are the metrics that we should adopt to be able to measure? You've given us some things that, inclusive design, accountability in delivery, very specific mandates as well. How would we know that we have gotten there? What are the metrics? How would we measure that?
Yes, a great question, actually. So it's really important that we measure what we want to see impact in, right? So we are still struggling at just having data that's segregated even by gender, believe it or not. In 2025, we are not collecting gender desegregated data. We are not collecting data that's desegregated by income levels. And we learned this when we used to do the affordability index report, because, you know, a lot of these indices rely on national averages. So if you take a country, for example, like South Africa, and you measure it on affordability based on the 1 gig for no more than 2% of household income, the country actually comes out as being quite affordable, right? However, when you take the population, because South Africa is a country where more than 50% of the population lives on less than half the average GNI. So when you take the population and you splice it by income quantiles, you realize that it's only the top 20% that's actually affording the access. But the bottom, 60 to 80% is barely affording. In fact, the bottom 20% is spending anywhere from 20 to 60% of average monthly income for that connectivity. So it's really important that we invest in segregated data and really and truly get to understand what it is that we are measuring. If you don't measure it, it just really truly does not exist, right? And we've got these incredible instruments like your national broadband plan that can be mute. In fact, if you take a lot of national broadband plans and just do a word search of women, you'll maybe find 1 or 2, but no real measurement of how, are we going to know we've actually succeeded? Is it, 10% of the women, 30% of the women? We just have not been clear. So we've got an opportunity to make sure that our instruments that we measure our connectivity, our gaps with, are very clear and articulate on, how we are, on what the target and that goal is. Is it 40% of the unconnected? What percentage of that is women, and what percentage is rural? We know women are also not a monolithic group. So really getting into all those intersections of how we are connecting people is really important. But also moving away from measuring on basic connectivity. I'm a big advocate of us raising the standards. At the global level, the standard of a connected person is someone who uses the internet once every 3 months is so underwhelming that we need to just really, I think those of us also who are going to WSIS need to really talk a lot about how that standard needs to improve. Meaningful connectivity is about daily access, especially when we are talking about the age of artificial intelligence and the things that, we want to do in terms of digitization of public services. Daily access, unlimited access, 4G speed at minimum, if we truly want people to do the kinds of things that, we are promising them for transformation. Because the truth is we need to stop having poor policies for poor people, poor phones for poor people. Poor people also want the nice phones. So let's work on real device affordability strategies, not device financing. There's a big difference between you can afford a phone over 3 months and you can afford a phone now, so we need to, I feel like we really have not started to do the work in terms of driving affordability, in terms of making sure that there's rich and relevant content. Predominant content in Africa, for example, is still very much in English, which is not a majority language for most of our population. So, I think, looking at all of the instruments that we have, including our digital development policies in general, to see how are they explicit about, the kind of vision that we've set for ourselves, the goals, the targets, and reviewing those on an annual basis, on every 2 years, and revising them when there's a need to. It's okay for us to say, we've tried this, it didn't work, let's try something different.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anika, and for emphasizing that we do have an opportunity to be clear with the intersecting connectivity goals to achieve regular, high quality and affordable access. I'll come to you now, Tobekile. You lead PIN's advocacy and our partnership building efforts. So in what role do public-private partnerships, and community-driven models play in ensuring access to the internet?
Thank you so much, Nena, for talking about public-private partnerships and obviously access to the internet for our communities. I think we've already begun to, unpack community-centered connectivity initiatives and how they are important. And when we're looking at it from the perspective of those initiatives, it is clear that it's a multi-stakeholder approach. It's all hands on deck in terms of laying out what is important, what should be there for meaningful connectivity. I need to highlight the importance of obviously a relevant and an appropriate regulatory environment that ensures that connectivity and meaningful connectivity is reached and attained, especially for excluded communities. And this is something at the heart of our work at Paradigm Initiative, focusing on those who are underserved in rural communities. And a research from ITU last year, presented that at least 38% of the African population is online. The digital divide is not something that has been eradicated at this point. Even as we look at attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, we still have a big gap that is there, and we are now even moving away from just connectivity, but saying there should be meaningful connectivity. And what does that mean for collaboration and putting all hands on deck in terms of ensuring that this is a reality for our communities. So I think in that vein, it's clear that in addressing that gap, there's need for that regulatory framework that ensures that community-centered connectivity initiatives can thrive, and also that even the private sector is also able to come on board. I think Onika touched on the Universal Service Fund, and it's something that we've done research on at Paradigm Initiative through our State of Digital Rights and Inclusion in Africa report, LONDA. And looking at the 2024 report, it shows that, from the 27 reported countries, we have less than 4 countries that really are transparent about those resources and what they're doing with them, what they're collecting, and how, they're gathering those resources through the support of the private sector. There's also not transparency about the initiatives that are even being rolled out, and there's not enough support even for whatever, community centers for connectivity, how they're being run and how they're being sustained, so that they're not just something that's put up in communities and as hubs, but it's something that is sustained. And I like the fact that as well there's, a lot of support from a lot of civil society actors that are, running other initiatives as well to support this. And I think Paradigm Initiative has done a lot of work on life legacy, ensuring that they bring digital literacy to communities and putting their hands on deck, and also engaging the government as well as a key partner to say, here we are, we can collaborate and ensure we expand, the reach of digital literacy in communities that are underserved. And I think one of the key important things, as we also talk about some of the work that we've done under the Local Networks Initiative together with EPC, I think it's been key to highlight the importance of social impact when these community-centered connectivity initiatives are being rolled out, ensuring that communities also are on board at the table of describing or rather articulating the vision of these initiatives, so that there's tangible, meaningful benefit for the communities as well. When we're looking at even inclusion as a whole, bringing their voices on board, what are the key things that they want to see, how they want to benefit from these initiatives, and how they can also be a critical stakeholder in ensuring that they're sustainable. I think it's something that's important. I will highlight, of course, as we are discussing the World Summit on Information Society and looking at how far we've come 20 years later, I think it's really concerning that where we are right now, we are at a place where 20 years later, we are still discussing the digital divide and articulating similar gaps that we articulated as far back as 2002, 2003, where we still need to see enabling policies that are ensuring that this happens. We still need to see, great cooperation across diverse stakeholders to ensure that there is meaningful connectivity. We still see a really broad digital divide, and how can we as we engage in these conversations, be able to speak truth to ourselves and say, do we really want to see this change? Do we really want to see the needle move? Because where we are still where we were. And we want to be able to ensure that we prioritize this. Even in national budgeting processes, we have actually governments making sure that they prioritize this. I've been in one engagement, with one government on the African continent where we're discussing digital inclusion for underserved communities. And the feedback was from one member of parliament that, look, do you really think my grandmother needs a smartphone? And you're like, okay, at this day and age, we're still debating the importance of access to digital technologies for our communities. So how far can we move? So I think we need to be at a place where we speak true to ourselves and say, look, we cannot leave anyone behind. And this is not an educated, elitist conversation, but it's a conversation that really ensures that our communities also have access to human rights. Connectivity, digital inclusion is a human right. I would phrase it that way.
Okay, thank you. I like how you ended. Digital inclusion is a human right, and it emphasizing how important it is to prioritize digital inclusion for unserved and underserved communities, and also the need for more transparency, even echoing what Onika said earlier as well, in implementation of these initiatives, especially the Universal Services Fund and community initiatives, because I believe also that transparency fosters trust. It makes building of these public-private partnerships even stronger. So thank you, Tobekile. I'll come to you now, Christian. Thank you for being here today. So looking ahead to 2030, now we've been saying set goals. What do we want to see? What do we want to achieve? And having, advised governments on digital rights, what innovation, be it technological or policy-based, has the potential to make today's digital divide obsolete, and how can we prepare for that future now?
All right. Thank you, Nena, and good morning to all the wonderful panelists and the friends participating online and on-site. I will talk more about the complexities of this debate right now, not perhaps in a very positive way, because actually we are seeing a lot of complexities in the world. 2030 looks so in the future right now that let's expect it to reach 2026 first. All right, from what I have been hearing these days at the IGF, there are, I think, 4 challenges that we have to address. Let's don't expect that these things actually make things more complex to close the digital divide. The first one I want to talk, and I think Christopher also mentioned it, is the emerging of new technologies, such as the low orbit satellites, which are of course rapidly solving connectivity problems, especially in the most remote areas. For countries with very big digital divides and low resources, such as my country, Bolivia, these kind of connections seem actually an interesting solution. So we should take them into account. But at the same time, also these technologies are generating new problems that perhaps we didn't have before, related to data sovereignty, spectrum allocation, national security, among others. And the second thing, the second challenge, is the regulatory power imbalances that now are growing between states and big tech companies. Countries of the global majority have today a minimum capacity to demand the fulfillment of guarantees and rights of these companies. This is something that we all know. But going back to the first complexity that I mentioned, for example, Starlink is operating in my country without permission. How this happened? Because my government asked Starlink to have a complaints office in order to operate in Bolivia. But since Starlink is so powerful and such a big company, they said, I don't need that. I don't need to put an office in your country. I can operate and I can provide my services even that you don't, even if I don't fulfill all their requirements. So that is happening. And how we can do accountability to these companies if they don't even want to invest in one office in one country like Bolivia. The third complexity is about the disappearance of a governance model based on cooperation. In a world in international crisis, it is becoming increasingly difficult to think of models of internet governance because particular interests are becoming more important than the needs of the most vulnerable populations. And that is something that we also have to address, and spaces like the IGF are so important because they allow us to speak about this kind of issues. And fourth, the increasingly complex technologies that today require an infrastructure and a computing capacity that our countries don't have. Now the digital divide is not only about having or not meaningful connectivity, it's also about having the enough capacity to run AIs, quantum computation, blockchains, cryptos, and all those technologies. So there is another connectivity divide, there is another digital divide that is happening right now, and we also have to address that digital divide for these countries because we are lagging behind, and we will not will have access to these technologies because we don't have this capacity to run them, right? So we don't even have the energy infrastructure to power it. That is why our countries are in a double digital divide. So these are real big complexities that we also, I think, we have to address. Of course, I'm being really negative in relation what can happen in the future, but I think after hearing all these things in the IGF, I think we also have to, speak about them.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for highlighting the increasing complexity in how the digital divide is growing as well. And maybe just to bring some balance, because you're right, looking at these complexities and challenges, it looks bleak because we're just trying to, solve one. And then, we have these increasing, these complexities and challenges being thrown at us. How would you, or what would you prefer as a balance? How would you balance this? I like the example you gave about Starlink and Bolivia, and also about how its new problems are coming up in terms of national security, data sovereignty, other digital rights issues. So how can we balance investment in infrastructure and ensuring that we have connectivity with the necessary investments in rights protection mechanisms for communities and for countries as well? Okay.
I agree with everything that Onika said. I think that is the way. So I also think that the answer depends on the context, the needs of the specific countries or regions. In the case of Bolivia, I think, for example, that the last mile problem is purely a market issue. Why? Because the invisible hand of the market failed here to solve the connectivity needed by remote areas and populations. Either because these are very small communities and nobody wants to invest in these communities, or because the state is receiving lobby of these very big companies, ICPs, and they don't allow these communities, for example, to have the regulation that they need for community networks. There are so many cases in Latin America and in my country of community networks that are actually functioning and resolving some of the connectivity problems. But as Christopher mentioned, there is a difficulty here to sustain these community networks, and the government is not helping at all, because the government are creating legislations and regulatory frameworks only from the perspective of these big companies, what these big companies need in order to operate, but they are not facilitating things for small companies that also have these issues, and they are doing what they can in order to resolve their own connectivity problems. I have a lot of cases in which communities, they said, I want to invest in my own infrastructure, but the government don't allow me to invest because the government says that only the government or a big company can invest in this community. Why? This is something really, I don't know how to explain it, because it's really hard to understand. So what should be done, in my opinion, and in my context, we need to stop seeing connectivity as something to be solved only by the market or only by big companies, and more as a basic need that should be solved through public investments, public-private alliances, with a greater participation of the communities that are affected, of course. And I think that the work that is being done by Internet Society, by Global Digital Inclusion Partnership, and civil society in general is really important, and we have to strengthen that work. Also, of course, with the inclusion of the local communities.
Thank you, Christian. My takeaway from your preferred solutions is they should be context-informed and people-focused. I've lost connectivity online to Zoom, but just to say to the audience online and on-site, I hope you're getting your questions ready, and I hope that this has been an engaging conversation for you with some key takeaways and focus areas. So before we go to Q&A, I think I have one last question, and this is for all my panelists. What practical steps can civil society, ISPs, mobile operators, all the stakeholders, we've talked about businesses, startups, what can they do together to de-risk investments in last mile infrastructure and promote inclusive access based on everything that you've spoken about today? I think I'll start from Chris, and then we can go down all the way to Christian.
I'll actually repeat something that was said earlier on. We need to understand there are many business models to providing connectivity. We need to understand that the dominant model of profit-centric telco, satellite provider, etc., whilst fundamentally important in providing the possibility of access, for last-mile access for communities isn't necessarily the sustainable way. You know, mimicking a small version of being a telco isn't the way to build a sustainable community network. There are co-op models. There are many other models that allow us to develop that. So I think really being innovative and creative in the way we think about what sustainable business models look like, and then, as has been said, getting governments to support that, you know, making spectrum licensing for local usage affordable and available to those networks in a way that doesn't just look at spectrum licensing as a nice income stream for the government. You know, understanding the GDP impact of giving people connectivity, you know, the astonishing changes to their lives you get through connectivity massively outweigh the small amount of money you can earn from selling community spectrum licenses to networks. So we really do need, as was said earlier, particularly by Anika, to drive governments to support very different types of connectivity solutions and business models, and put the regulation in place to support those.
Thank you, Chris. Wekili?
Thank you. I will echo the importance of an enabling regulatory framework and the importance of inclusion as a matter of importance and in line with human rights, not as a privilege, but something that is really critical and necessary, as well as also highlighting the importance of multi-stakeholder approaches, not just between the government and the private sector, but also civil society, because of some of the meaningful steps that CSOs are taking to bridge the connectivity gap.
Thank you, Tobekile.
Great. So I would say for me, it's advocating for policy incentives together. And it's really great that we are all here as government actors, private sector actors, and civil society. We need to focus this advocacy strongly on, access to universal service funds for multi-stakeholder projects. Tax waivers or import duty reductions on equipment for last mile connectivity, and license fee exemptions or flexible spectrum access for small scale operations, community networks, or other rural development initiatives. And on the data, we need to collaborate, to guide investment and share and combine disaggregated data on coverage gaps, on affordability and digital use to better identify and understand, what's viable for last mile investment areas. And civil society can help gather real-time community feedback, while operators and ISPs can share infrastructure maps or usage data with appropriate safeguards. I know there's a lot of protectionism that happens around this particular issue. And, lastly, we need to develop and support local digital ecosystems, by collaborating to incubate local startups, and encourage local device repair and distribution networks. It really baffles me that we are also talking about climate issues and e-waste and sustainability of the planet, but we still have so many countries where the right to repair is not practical and a reality for these devices. And that's one of the things that can help drive the affordability of devices down, especially for me in a continent like Africa that's a huge reuse market. It really baffles me that we have not looked at this issue of the right to repair as one of the solutions towards beginning to lower the cost of devices. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, it's can be repetitive because this was already mentioned that meaningful connectivity should be a right and should be embedded in all the international policy framework, not only the one related to digital policy, because this is something really transversal to almost anything right now. And as I mentioned, connectivity should not be left only for the market or the companies to solve. This is something that is really all the stakeholders need to be involved in this. Civil society, companies, government, and of course the local communities, because connectivity is not a privilege, it's a necessity.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. I already see a question coming up online, so I will take that as a cue to open the floor for questions. So the first question we have, talking of sustainability as a private sector looking at deploying community networks, what renewal incentives are available from Internet Society Foundation and how many years does the grant cover? So I believe this is for you, Chris.
Absolutely. So we provide a range of different support for community networks. We provide grants via our Connecting the Unconnected program. Usually these are done on an annual basis. We have annual granting windows. So there is the opportunity to continue grants going forward. But as I said, what we like to do is, if we get into a relationship with a community network, is build them towards the point where they are sustainable without the need for grants. Now, what that sometimes means is someone can come initially for a grant to support the initiation of a community network. And then at a later stage, they're looking to spread it out to a larger area. So the follow-on grant kind of allows them to increase their process, their coverage. And then later on, maybe it's something else. We're increasingly seeing power supply as something that people are wanting kind of support with. So we don't like to just continually fund something to stay as it is, or to kind of get to a situation where it's not possible to sustain without grant support. But what we do want to do is see, actually, if there is growth, how can we help those community networks overcome the next phase of their growth? And how can we get them on a path to sustainability? And how can we meet the needs of that community with the kind of support we're offering?
Thank you, Chris. And I hope that answered the question. We have one in the room.
Thank you very much. My name is Barak Otieno. I hope I can be heard. Yeah, I chair the Association of Community Networks in Kenya. I'm here with my colleague James sitting at the back. Thank you very much, Chris, and the rest of the panelists for the very interesting interventions, which are very relevant. Actually, I consider this a very pertinent and relevant topic. I wanted to just share some thoughts to affirm the comments that have been made by the panelists. First, Kenya now has about 20 community networks. We have a target by the Communications Authority of Kenya to build 100 community networks. It is based on realization of the fact that after 20 years of investment in GSM, we only have 30% of the country having meaningful connectivity, and therefore there is a need to accelerate connection of the 70% that are remaining, and community networks have been found to be a viable alternatives. Thanks to the Internet Society, we have received seed funding that has actually established 90% of the community networks that I have mentioned. We do have support from APC that has also contributed, which we really appreciate. But we have a letter of commitment, or we have commitment from the Internet Society to work with us in achieving our target of 100 community networks. Of course, I cannot forget to thank the Communications Authority of Kenya, which has worked with the community to ensure that we have a community network service provider license. We also have further systemic enhancements to create a Tier 4 license that will allow community operators to be able to access licensing frameworks. We also have a sandbox that is allowing us to try out TV white space technology, to also look at alternative ways of making use of community spectrum. And I think these are models that I believe can be documented, as Onika said earlier, and shared across board. Lastly, our focus now is on sustainability. We have demonstrated that community networks are actually a viable alternative, but the challenge now is to actually prove that there are sustainable means of providing affordable connectivity to the community, and maybe that's a challenge I will throw back to the panel to help us now figure out the sustainability component. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barak. Any reflections to Barak?
I mean, I'd just like to give the respect back and respect the work that Barak and the organisation does. You know, it's very nice of him to mention ourselves and APC as supporters, but the work that they do in Kenya is astonishing. And I think most importantly, can be a case study for what country-level coordination of community networks, training, development can actually do to achieve really immense results.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Hello? You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Leo from United Republic of Tanzania. I want to ask you one issue. We all acknowledge that accessibility is still a big challenge, especially in Global South, despite of the improvement of mobile broadband coverage. We understand 8% plus of coverage is achievable against the accessibility of 38% in Africa. Really shows that the pricing and the device affordability is still a big problem. Apart from the solution you have mentioned, please can you share more experience you have to solve the issue of the accessibility, especially in the device affordability? Thank you.
You want to take that, Monica?
Okay, that's a bit of a tough one. So, you know, device affordability, one of the research that we had done specifically looking at Africa, we actually learned that device affordability is still a very huge challenge in addition to, you know, the affordability of the internet itself. And that when you look at how much people are actually spending on accessing these devices, we were able to find that some communities, some countries, you find that people are spending anywhere from 20 to 60% of average household income on just purchasing one device. There's a lot of work that's currently happening around device affordability, including a lot of resistance against subsidies of devices, and we'll park that for a little bit for now. So looking at affordability specifically, one of the things that we've done successfully in a couple of countries is looking at taxation of devices, and we found that there's anywhere from 20 to 40% of taxation that is on devices, whether it's your import duty tax, your VAT, your sales tax or what have you, but there's anywhere from 20 to 45%. And we've been able to demonstrate actually that if governments could just roll back some of those taxes, it actually increases uptake of digital technologies within the country. And I'll give you just a quick example between Nigeria and Ghana, where we found that people in Ghana would actually buy their devices in Nigeria and activate them in Ghana, including those who live on the border in terms of their DSTV subscription. They would live in one country and do their subscription in another country, because those taxes are so high that they actually make a difference in affordability. And so, but I think what has been an area I will criticize of our multi-stakeholder community is that our focus when it comes to device affordability has predominantly been on affording the devices over time, instead of really tackling the issue of how do we lower that initial cost of devices to a point where more people can afford to be able to get them. The repair issue is one of them. No one wants to talk about local assembly. I'm not sure why, because local assembly can also enable, gives an opportunity to also enable and retool the workforce in that country, especially in a continent like Africa, where majority of our population is young people. We need retooling and reskilling. So bringing some of these devices to be partially or fully assembled within the continent would make a huge difference, including the content that's uploaded, right? So why must this device arrive in my country with everything, including the plastic that gets peeled off and all the software already installed? Couldn't some of those happen locally? And we've seen this model with the motorbikes that are imported into the continent for delivery of food. They literally come in parts, and therefore they are taxed differently compared to if they arrived as a fully assembled motorbike to service the community. The mobile operators have predominantly been working on the device affordability around financing schemes and different models for that, and that's really great and wonderful. But I really would love to see a commitment from civil society, from government especially, and some private sector around developing this phone that we were promised, I don't know how many years ago. The $10 phone is not here yet, but maybe it's not going to be $10, but we need to really, I would not give us a good grade on device affordability. We haven't done a good job. We need to regulate for both the market and for consumer protection, and pricing is a consumer protection issue.
Thank you, Anika. And I believe Tobekile, you wanted to chime in?
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in, I think, in response to the great comment from the second speaker, just to highlight, I think, the importance of what actions are being taken in other spaces. I know in Tanzania, for example, there's been, great work as well by community networks, and I think annually they prioritize the school of community networks, and we've been part of that process as well to be able to convene this school of community networks, where I think we unpack how to improve skills in designing, administration, and management of the community-based telecommunications networks, as well as developing skills as well to create a sustainable business model for those community networks. I think that would be very key in terms of sustainability of the ongoing community networks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Lee McKnight, a Syracuse University professor in the United States. First, I wanted to share some possible good news or challenge the perspective that blockchain and other technologies are not reachable or accessible in the global south. We are working with Brazilian and Peruvian professors right now with open source software that we would be bringing and co-creating with indigenous and local communities in the Brazilian and Peruvian Amazon later this year. So this is not, and secondly on AI, not AI if you believe Google and it takes a giant $1 trillion data center. It doesn't. There's some smaller and range of options also at the edge that can be reached and be accessible elsewhere. So that's the first comment. Second, I wanted to note, I have something on my back, which is with, I'm kind of making an announcement. Anika knows what it is. So on behalf of the Africa and Global Community Internet Program, or a SIP, as in a SIP of internet, meaning not first-class internet, but internet accessible anywhere, and also thanks to the Internet Society Foundation support a couple years earlier in Costa Rica, we are now launching the program in cooperation with the government of Ghana and with the African Parliamentary Network. For real, to bring these. What's in here also is a Starlink Mini, also is batteries, also is solar panel. You can set up, you can create a community network everywhere except the North and South Pole, starting now. And we will be bringing this forward, again, in cooperation with Internet Society chapters in many countries, with Parliament across Africa, Central America, and elsewhere. So this is not a magic solution. There are limitations still, but there is really no reason, with support of the parliaments, not just the branches. So this is my tip for comment for all of you, is like, think about the parliamentarians. They can't access the internet either when they go out there. They're your natural allies to bring and reform the legislation to bring community networks everywhere, because we've tapped out under WSIS. We've at 2.6 billion in 2022, 2023, 24, 25, it's still 2.6 billion unconnected. It's not working. This is the only approach that's going to work, is community networks. And I thank you for everyone's attention.
Thank you.
Thank you for that intervention. Congratulations. So, thank you.
I'm Lisa Dakanay from the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia. I just wanted to ask the panel in terms of experiences and perspectives of integrating community-centered connectivity initiatives with social entrepreneurship, social enterprise development, and social and solidarity economy. Because in the Asia-Pacific region and the Philippines, where I come from, that integration has been a critical factor, I think, in addressing sustainability and social impact issues of community-centered connectivity initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. I think she can start with Chris.
It's late on Friday. I'm running very low on brain and energy at the moment. We discussed on the panel yesterday and the excellent work in measuring the social impact of community networks that was presented. That being able, and again it goes back to the business model question, being able to understand what the impact of a community network is, not just in profit and sustainability, not just in a very simple calculation of contribution to the economy, but to a very broad social impact network of, what is the implications on health, on education, or on a very broad range of factors that was presented at our session we were both on yesterday, I think gives us a much better sense of assessing the success of a community network and being able to point to what is possible by investments in community networks. These are not, and I can't say this enough, these are not mini telcos. These are community organizations providing a vital service to a local community in a way that makes sense for that community. And I think the better we can have the kind of granularity that was offered in the social impact assessment work that you were showing yesterday, gives us that opportunity to not only measure ourselves, the impact better, and obviously measuring the impact of the community networks is something we do a lot within our granting program at ISOC, and something I want to look to see if we can adopt the things that were presented yesterday in the other session to do. but far more importantly, and again going back to the previous question from the previous speaker, in the way we talk to governments and parliamentarians about why this is important and why it is essential. Talking about success in as broad a spectrum as possible of social and economic indicators allows us to make an incredibly strong case for the investment in community networks, the right policies for community networks, and the support of the kind of organizations that Barack and many people in the room are running.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wanted to speak to the question on the social
advice.
Yes.
It's really important for us as we, I always feel uncomfortable sort of seeing myself as this uber advocate for connectivity, and the question is always, so what? You want people to connect to do what exactly? So, social enterprises are a real great opportunity for us to actually also support the use case of this connectivity and why we want people to be connected. And I think the best example that I have so far, and this is going to just truly be a plug-in. So we did this study that was actually also funded by Internet Society on connected resilience, looking at how women are staying connected through meaningful connectivity specifically. And one of the organizations that we discovered in this process and continue to support and work with is an organization called Women in Digital that's based in Bangladesh. And, Anila basically started this organization with the excitement and aim of teaching women how to code. Now, we all know about all these programs about teaching women how to code. There's all kinds of goals. We're going to get 1 million girls coding and all of that. And the question always becomes, so after all of this, then what? What are these girls exactly doing with this coding? And so it's really important. I think what Women in Digital have been able to do is create an ecosystem for them to, after they are trained, to be able to begin to change the content ecosystem within Bangladesh, right? So one of the things that they are doing that I actually just got mine this week is creating smart cards for people. So I'm coming all the way from South Africa. I ordered my digital smart card from Bangladesh because I want to support this project that's led by women, where they are creating these smart cards and just really incredible. And someone kind from Bangladesh was able to bring it to me to this session. So it's not, for me, I think it's really important that it's not good enough for us to get people devices, get people digital skills. How are they utilizing them? How are we creating content that's relevant and usable for them? But how are we also giving them an opportunity to truly transform their lives and be able to utilize these resources? How is government supporting social enterprises and creating an enabling environment for them to be successful and to ease registration? Because right now, most countries, registration is really for profit or non-profit. Social entrepreneurship has huge opportunities, especially in digital space, but it's not recognized as, a formal business in quite a lot of communities so far.
Thank you, Anika. We're about time, so maybe I'll give a minute to Tobekile and to Christian, so some final remarks before we close.
Thank you so much, Nina, and thanks for everyone who's in the room, I think, and all the amazing contributions. I think what is key here from today's conversation is the importance of ensuring that those who are in underserved communities are not left behind, and that we ensure that there's meaningful connectivity, and how we can do that through, effective regulatory frameworks and also relevant support as well, not just for establishing community networks, but also for their sustainability, and that's very critical and very important.
Thank you, Tobekile.
I would like to highlight and congratulate the initiative that they are doing with local populations in Brazil. I think that is really important, and I think that is one of the cases we should replicate all. I believe that open source is really a technology that is a game changer, and it has the capacity to empower local communities and reduce the dependence that countries like the one that I represent, we have with these very big tech companies. So including local communities is not only something about inclusion, it's also about diversity. And we want to create an internet for the future that has that diversity, that has indigenous languages, that has the perspective of these communities in how we are constructing, building technology.
Thank you, Christian. I want to thank my panel today, the esteemed panelists. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for the fantastic insights, the interventions. We've gotten some great examples today from the panel and from the audience on what we can replicate in our communities going forward. Some key takeaways today. I think what's reverberated a few things: connectivity as a right, because connectivity is foundational, but also seeing that the digital divide is increasingly becoming more complex with new challenges such as, like you mentioned, data sovereignty and national security. But we also have the opportunity with some of the recommendations that have been emphasized today: inclusivity in design, accountability in delivery, being creative with business models, enabling regulatory frameworks that are rooted and based in human rights, people-centered policies that are context-informed, affordable licensing, and putting the communities at the center. And also one that I was really happy about, or to hear more about, is the opportunity that we have to be clear with the intersecting goals of connectivity, because we all come from different contexts that will enable us provide not just connectivity, but relevant, regular, high quality, affordable, and meaningful access. So thank you all today for your time, for making time to be here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your contributions and for the interventions. And I hope you have a great rest of the conference and enjoy the closing ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you.